Well, prosecutors in Illinois are now fighting to bring a Marine already convicted of another murder back to his home state to stand trial in the stabbing death of two little girls. Prosecutors say DNA evidence does link him to the 2005 killing of these two little girls, 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and 9-year-old Crystal Tobias. The suspect in the killings is 25-year-old Jorge Torres. Torres is now behind bars in Virginia. He has been sentenced to death for the 2009 murder of a fellow service member in the Navy. So, will he ever be facing justice in the case of the two little girls in Illinois? Dan Schorr is a former prosecutor. Rebecca Rose Woodland is a trial attorney. Dan, why wouldn't you bring someone to trial in a murder case? I mean, everyone's got to get justice.
They should, and they probably will. The defense attorney is saying, well, my client's being sentenced to death. What are you going to do in punishment beyond death? However, it's really important to bring him for this new case. First of all, you have the family of the victims, and the victims themselves. They have a memory that's going to live on. Their murder's been unsolved, or at least we think we have the killer now, but he hasn't been tried and convicted. You need justice. Also, just because he's convicted and sentenced to death, we don't know what's going to happen with the appeals in that case. We've seen many cases that are overturned or sentences changed, so he should face charges. This is a brutal crime, and hopefully he'll be brought to justice on this case also.
Rebecca, does this happen often? Is it common if someone is sentenced to death or has been convicted of a murder, is then tried again for something else?
We have seen this in the past. I mean, it's very rare there aren't many murder convictions in general in this country any longer. We have seen it before because what you're really seeing here is most likely a serial killer if the DNA connects him. Now, the reality is it's probably a good idea to try him because he may have a defense to those two crimes. So although he is sentenced to death in Virginia, Dan's right. We don't know what the appeals process will be there. We don't know if the trial came through and there aren't appealable issues that then he's found either another trial or something else. So let's hold those separate because for his defense, actually, it's beneficial to have both separate and have a defense on those two cases as well.
All right, and we'll see how this plays out and what the judge says. Meanwhile, there's another bizarre and strange story that we told you about yesterday. Remember this? Two 12-year-old girls from Wisconsin? Well, they've been charged with the attempted murder in the stabbing death of another little girl. They apparently took her into the woods and claimed they tried to kill her to appease a shadowy fictional internet character known as Slender Man. There's Slender Man. So, Dan, this is so tragic and sad. When you've got, kids thinking either this is real or trying to do something as horrific as this, as is charged, to appease or be part of a fictional internet game.
Right, and teens and preteens have long been obsessed with these fictional characters. When I was a teenager, it was Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. Now with the internet and interactive gaming, there's so many ways for people to become even more obsessed and connect. But it's not a legal defense, in my opinion, in any way to the killings. These were planned out over months. They drew in their victim. They almost killed her. They're going to be tried as adults, and I believe they should for such a vicious crime.
Thankfully, the victim is survived. I mean, this is just so astounding, and it is so tragic and horrific in terms of what's going on with some of our young people, Rebecca.
I mean, and in this case, the defense has an uphill battle because the prosecution has determined and has asked and the judge has determined to try 12-year-old girls as adults. So
is that fair?
Well, the judge has determined that what Dan said, based on their premeditation and this intense behavioral pattern of them, I'm thinking the defense may go with some sort of a mental incapacity or mental instability for the two girls, but I don't know psychologically what they've seen in the past or what they're experiencing, but it is so severe what they're alleged to have done that to try them as adults, as 12-year-olds, they're going to face 65 years in prison. And the girl has not died that they attempted to kill. So, I mean, they're making a really strong stand in that state, the prosecution and the judge, that this will not be tolerated. Parents need to manage their children, and they need to manage what they're watching on the internet.
Well, that's a great point, Dan. And what do parents do? I mean, we've seen the tragic case of Elliot Rodger out in Santa Barbara. Apparently, he was all involved in the world of Warcraft. What can parents do? What should society do in terms of these fictional games if it does get to this point where it actually leads to potential real crimes?
Well, the primary responsibility is with the parents to watch what their kids are doing. unfortunately, there's so many ways for kids to connect with other people and to connect with these fictional characters away from their parents' knowledge, either using computers, away from the home, or with cell phones. It's harder and harder for parents to look out for what's happening, but they need to try. They need to monitor their computer activity, their phone activity. It's still not going to guarantee everything. I bet these kids had some other problems other than just the fact that they were obsessed with Slender Man that led them to commit this vicious crime. So we shouldn't blame it all on their activity with this fictional character.
Another good reason and advice for parents to try and stay on top of the kids. Dan and Rebecca, thanks so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Well, Jenna, the Connecticut prom day stabbing suspect has pled not guilty in Superior Court. He is Christopher Plaskin. He allegedly attacked his fellow student, Marin Sanchez, in school by stabbing her repeatedly to death for rejecting his prom invitation. On the day of the stabbing, he also reportedly confessed to police, saying, quote, "I did it, just arrest me." Well, now the teen's attorney is saying he might base his case on the mental health of his client, who happens to be on antipsychotic and anti-anxiety medications. This is the victim you're looking at right now. The 17-year-old alleged defendant is now being prosecuted and is adult and faces up to 60 years in prison. Weighing in this case is Dan Schorr, former prosecutor, and Rebecca Rose Woodland, trial attorney. Rebecca, let me start with you. How could the defense attorney claim insanity if he apparently was in his right mind and told police, "I did it, arrest me"?
Well, this is the distinction. Legal insanity isn't what we think of a crazy person. It can be, but not only some crazy person who can't even communicate or say anything. The legal insanity defense in Connecticut is the defendant's burden to prove, but they have to prove that at the time he didn't know the distinction between right and wrong.
How do you do that?
Now there's the hard part. He has to prove that he's had a mental illness or condition that would prevent him from knowing that. In this case, all we know is that he's on currently antipsychotic, anti-anxiety drugs, allegedly. When did they start? After or before? How long before? What was his mental state before? What did his psychiatrist say? Was he put in an institution? Was he let go? I mean, there are so many questions, and you also have court evaluations for the insanity defense. It's very, very difficult to prove.
Dan, man, oh man, so many young people on anti-anxiety, psychotic type of medications these days. It really is across the country. Is it a defense? Is it proper? How do we deal with that?
Well, just because someone has mental illness doesn't mean they have a viable legal insanity defense. Anyone who stabs someone to death is usually not a well-adjusted person, has some kind of mental problems. Here, it's probably used as a defense of last resort. There's no factual or legal defense. He was seen killing the victim here. He had blood on his clothes. He admitted it to the police. So insanity is a lot of times used because there is no other defense. He has to show that he didn't understand the wrongfulness of what he did, yet he told the police to arrest him. So that shows that he did understand that something wrong happened. I don't see him being successful here.
Yeah, what type of defense is there here?
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, I did it, arrest me. You know, your attorney then has to say, okay, what happened to you in the past? And there is a possibility that he truly doesn't understand right from wrong. I did it doesn't mean that I knew what I was doing would lead to death or a wrong act. I mean, that's the distinction legally that it's a very difficult
And Dan, what if
defense.
what if the lawyer, you know what they do too, they always challenge the police. They could say, he never said that. That's not true. The police are making it up. Maybe he could claim that.
Right, and they'll have to show a jury not to believe that statement or to get a judge to rule that the statement was taken, that's inadmissible. But if he spontaneously said to the police, "I did it, arrest me," which it sounds like he allegedly did, there's really going to be very little legal basis to.
That's an excitable utterance. I learned about that during the Bernard Goetz case.
And it's also a statement against interest, so even if it's not excited, it still comes in as an admission. So it's really hard to knock that out if you're the defense attorney.
All right, well, since you guys are the lawyers here, we'll turn to another case. This is the one in Michigan, really a tragic case there. There's a man who's claiming insanity at his triple murder trial. Prosecutors say that he stabbed his wife 59 times, then he slashed the throats of his 12-year-old and 14-year-old children. I mean, this is just so horrible, Rebecca. I mean, what in this type of case, what do you do? This man claimed there were financial pressures, he couldn't handle everything, and allegedly kills his family.
Yeah, now those are going to be issues that are going to be very hard to raise the insanity defense. He knowingly says, I was stressed, I was out of my mind, but that's not a legal insanity defense in Michigan. That could come into play in his sentencing, that he was under duress, but insanity in Michigan is the same as we were just talking about. He has to not know what he did was wrong. And in some of the understanding that I have of this case, it seems like he knew, he planned, and now says, whoa, I was crazy. Well, yeah, of course, you slit your wife's throat, you stabbed your wife and slit your 2 children's throat. Yes, you were crazy, but legally were you crazy? Not so sure.
Dan, allegedly, he waited for the children to come home from school. One got his backpack off. He started stabbing his son, allegedly. So how did he get around that?
This looks like it was a thought-out crime because, as you said, he was laying in wait for the 2 children to come home. The night before, he was on his computer looking up human dissection, human anatomy, and travel plans. And then after he did this, he fled to India. He's been extradited. So that really shows a consciousness of guilt and also an understanding it was wrong if you flee the country after committing these killings.
You're looking at the son who was killed. Such a tragedy when you have these type of domestic situations. And, of course, the daughter who was also stabbed to death. Well, that eventually before a jury. Rebecca and Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
With the insight.